The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everybody to the webinar on disaster recovery as a service with Veeam CDP. My name is Peter Verreken. Welcome. I'm a solution architect at Veeam, mainly focusing on the service providers. So I see we have already quite a lot of attendees. So we can just get started right away. Probably some other people will join later. Just some housekeeping rules, right? As everybody knows, this meeting or this webinar better will be recorded, right? Is recorded already at this moment. And you will receive the slides, you will receive the recording in just a couple of days. So even if you have registered, but you didn't show up, for example, because of circumstances, you will still get an email with the presentation and the recording, right? So in case there are any questions, please don't use the chat, but use the Q&A panel, right? So on the right, there is this questions pane. So feel free to write there any kind of questions that you may have. I will ask the first question already. Is the audio okay? Can everybody hear everything properly? Then you can write it in the Yes, some people have found the Q&A panel. Perfect. So then we can already move with some more confidence. Great. Perfect. So what are we going to talk about in this presentation? So first of all, the agenda, disaster recovery, right? So we're going to cover a little bit very fast on why you should go for disaster recovery or disaster recovery as a service, why you should choose for CDP, right? Then we'll go deep dive into the components. We'll have a look at the policy statuses, right? So whether that's successful or failed, or what's actually the status in the CDP policy. And then we'll quickly go over the different offerings because there's so many variants. So I just compiled a slide with all of the options there to give you some food for thought, right? So, but before we actually go into everything, let's start with a quick poll. So if we can pull up the poll, so just to see what you think about this. All right, so we can see the poll on the screen, right? So what are your main challenges for offering disaster recovery, right? So you can select all that apply, right? So the options are, well, there's no demand from customers. My type of customers is not doing anything with it. So there's no demand, or it's too expensive. Could be from your side as a service provider. Could be from the customer that they think this is way too expensive. So then, yeah, they're not going to do anything with it. Or there is just no disaster recovery site at the customer, just single site. Or you as a service provider maybe have no infrastructure available for it, right? Could be just lack of expertise, right? There is no shame in that. I mean, I also don't know everything. So it could be just that, well, we're just not qualified enough on this topic. I mean, it's not that easy, right? It's just not software, it's the whole stack. So, or maybe anything else that it could be. So if you write other, it would of course be interesting to see what you actually mean by other, right? Maybe you can write it in the chat and just give us some ideas what else could be a good reason, right? So I'll just give a few seconds for people to start voting. I see some responses coming in. I see the top ones are no disaster recovery site or infrastructure available. Yeah, fair point. We also have lack of expertise. Yeah, exactly, no shame in that. No demand from customers, right? So the third one is actually, it's too expensive, right? So yeah, price is always something to consider. And then we have no demand from customers or other. So 20% says other, right? Yeah, time. Yeah, time maybe to implement it. Yeah, so or yeah, budget. Yeah, so lots of good answers there. So that gives us some more insights in that. So thanks for this. Great. So let's move on. So why disaster recovery as a service, right? Or disaster recovery in general? Well, let's be realistic, right? Disasters just happen, unfortunately. Fire, flood, storm, malware, hardware corruption, uh, data corruption, hardware failure, right? No corruption. Ransomware, right? Because ransomware these days is also kind of a disaster. So lots of things happening. And no doubt many of you have already engaged or experienced in this kind of disaster recovery, maybe for your own infrastructure, maybe at a customer infrastructure. So, but the point is that no matter how big or small these customers are, right, or organizations, it's not about having no plans at all, right? Most of the customers or service providers that that we speak to, it's they have a plan in place, but then afterwards, it's kind of like, yeah, what's the plan actually working as it should, as expected? It didn't really go as we wanted it to go, so it's more about being prepared in advance and testing this plan more often, right? So we just in the some of the surveys we sent earlier this year, they show that almost 80% of the businesses, they just don't feel that they're actually prepared, right? So that is definitely something to work on. And then again, as with the poll, right? Do we have the expertise? I mean, seriously, you guys as service providers, there's so many things that you're offering today, right? It's just another checkbox, right? Some other service that you want to offer. So it could be expertise on your hand, but it could be also on the customer side, right? So maybe you say, hey, we can take this away from you. You don't have to think about anything anymore. We'll set up the infrastructure. And maybe for you, if you don't have the expertise as a service provider, well, you have to get started maybe because there's a customer demand. And at some point, you'll get some experience. And once you've done it for one customer, right? And if you do it in a multi-tenant environment, then it's basically onboard the second, the third, the fourth customer. So it goes a bit easier, right? Budget, yes, budget definitely important, especially when talking to customers. But it's not just put some piece of software in place and everything works, right? Because we're talking RPOs, RTOs. We have to have the whole hardware stack, network connectivity, all of these things in place. Not that easy, right? And do we have the time, right? I think that's something that's very popular these days is when I speak to service providers is the lack of time, right? There's so many things going on already. We just don't have the time anymore to look at this, right? So how could it look like? How could disaster recovery as a service for you as a service provider be? So it could be, for example, like this. We have a customer environment and we have your managed cloud, right? Now, your managed cloud, this could be everything. This could be your own data center, but let's not forget, some service providers just white label some other service from another service provider, right? There's no shame in that. You focus on other things, but you can resell disaster recovery from another service provider as well. So you don't have to manage the underlying infrastructure, right? So there's many options here, right? So it could be just from vSphere into your vSphere, could be Hyper-V into your Hyper-V, and it could also be, for example, from vSphere at the customer side into VMware Cloud Director on your side, right? So you have already some multi-tenant setup with VCD right there. So you just push all the customers straight in there, right? And just to wrap this part up, I mean, disaster recovery is just a single part of the entire Veeam data platform, right? So there's many other things that our platform is capable of, right? So if you look at, we have also monitoring and analytics, some more deep dive in statistics or getting alerts and reporting, right? Of course, classic backup and recovery, that's what we are best at, right? but then also integration, as you see on the left with public clouds, Kubernetes, or on the right, SaaS, Microsoft 365, Salesforce. There's so many things that we can offer today, right? We're not going to go into detail on any of these other subjects, right? But it's just to give you an idea. Maybe you were not aware of all the other things that we can actually also do for you, right? So enough said with that. Let's go deeper into CDP, because in the end, that's why you signed up in the first place for this webinar, right? So why Veeam CDP, right? So let me just ask here in the audience, do some of you have already CDP implemented, right? You already have it running at some customers, so feel free to post it in the chat. It's always good to see some interaction. So why would you use CDP? So generally we recommend CDP as a disaster recovery for the tier 1 workloads, or the top tier workloads, or the most critical workloads, right? CDP, right? So CDP, yes, I'm using the abbreviation here, right? Continuous data protection, right? So just to be clear, so what can we offer here? First of all, with CDP, we offer the lowest RPOs and RTOs, right? Maybe you're already aware of Veeam backup and replication in the past, right? We have backup, and then you have a backup file is the result of that. You have replication, so classic virtual machine. You have a replica, so you have your virtual machine files. And on the other side, you also have a powered off virtual machine that can be used in case of a disaster, right? You can power it on in case the source one goes down. So that is generally done every couple of hours. Now with CDP, we can do this in seconds or minutes instead of the traditional Veeam replication that you are used to, right? So very cool. On the other hand, all of the data, all of the communication is encrypted. Yeah. So everything between all the Veeam components is encrypted. You can also set up the network traffic rules where all of the traffic between ESXi and everything can also be encrypted. So very secure here. No VMware snapshots. Yeah, I think that's something that we generally run into. Yeah, and as you can see, it says VMware. So yes, CDP is VMware only. Right, see some things popping up in the chat already. So yes, CDP is VMware only. So no snapshots here. So this is really great because I don't have any commit issues, right? Because it happens that you replicate some virtual machines and then afterwards you need to commit all the data again, and that causes VM stuns, right? So here you don't have this anymore, right? So also there is no workload or hardware dependency. So you can protect any operating system, any application with any underlying storage. So if you still have those customers out there, let's say with some old Windows 2000 in a virtual machine, and you shouldn't, but you do, you can still replicate them, right? Because all we do is we capture the IO, send it to the other side. We really don't look, or we don't care what's running inside of this virtual machine. So that's pretty cool. So again, when do we use CDP? We use CDP for critical workloads, right? So instead of Veeam replications, snapshot based, right? Maybe instead of asynchronous storage replication, right? Can you replicate all of your virtual machines with CDP? Of course you can, right? The question is, should you? Maybe, maybe not, right? Because again, we're capturing all of the IO, and you'll see in the next section, we capture all of the IO, send it. So the more virtual machines, the more IO that is going back and forth. And again, if you, for example, say, okay, I'm a web shop here, and this web shop is super critical. So then maybe you should replicate all the machines related to this web shop. But should you also replicate with CDP the virtual machines that, I don't know, are being used, let's say, by HR department, just to give an example, right? They have a file server with some invoices and this and that from whatever, or some internal stuff. Do we need to have it online within 2 minutes after something crashes? Or maybe it's not so critical and just within the next couple of hours is fine as well. Exactly. So we need to classify, right? What is actually super critical for my business to keep running, right? For business continuity. Those machines I need to have up and running. So that's what you need to be looking at, right? And okay, it's agentless as well, right? So that's also pretty good. Nothing to install inside a virtual machine, right? Everything happens outside of the virtual machines. Again, as I mentioned before, the operating system inside the virtual machine is absolutely not relevant. So, and also we are using the vSphere VIO API, right? So, and that's also why CDP is only working for VMware, because we're leveraging a VMware vSphere API, right? That's why it's not working on Hyper-V, for example, as some of you are asking, right? So this is VMware only uses this framework. And this framework was, if I'm not mistaken, released somewhere with vSphere 6, update 1 or so, I found. And so the way that it works is that the filter lives inside of the ESXi host, and it allows it to intercept data from the guest operating system as it's being written to the VMDK, right, to the disk. So all the data that is passed through this filter can then be used either for caching, right, for example, for better performance, or it can be used for replication, right? So, and of course, we in Veeam, we use it for replication. So also important is this filter driver sits in the user space on the ESXi host. So it means that if something goes wrong with this filter driver, it won't crash your entire ESXi host, right? So that's pretty good as well, right? So I see someone asking agentless, right? It means we don't need to install any kind of piece of software inside of the virtual machine, right? Very important. So what's also different? What is different is the short-term retention. So short-term retention. So first of all, we have to be aware that the short-term retention is crash consistent, right? So this is very important. So we specify the RPO, and as you can see here in the example, we have an RPO set for 15 seconds. We see this as the most optimal RPO, right? The minimum is 2 seconds, the maximum is 60 minutes. Now, should you be replicating 24/7? You can if you want, but you also have a schedule where you can say, I want to replicate only between business hours. So only 8 to 8 or 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, whatever it is you want. Because maybe you have a business or your customer runs a business and you don't need to replicate in the weekends or at night. So that's an option, right? Because then the next thing important is the point in time recovery period, right? In this example, 4 hours. So what it means is that by specifying here 4 hours, it means that I will be able to go back in the last 4 hours in intervals of 15 seconds, right? So these 4 hours, it's like a moving window. It always keeps going, right? Like we are moving in time. And in the last 4 hours, I will be able to roll back to 15 seconds ago, 30 seconds, 45, 60, etc. Right? So this is the short-term retention that you will see. All right. And again, this is crash consistent because we don't touch anything in the virtual machine. We're just capturing the IO, sending it to the other side. Then long-term retention. And the long-term retention allows for application consistency. So that's pretty cool. So here we can say that, hey, I want you to create additional restore points every X hours. So for example, every 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever you want. And you can set in the schedule that, for example, during the day, I only want crash consistent, and during the night, I want application consistent, or at lunchtime, then you can take an application consistent, but then not again, because some applications are very sensitive to when you do some VSS or some quiescing on the database and this and that. You never know how it works. You always should test these kind of scripts, right? So, but you can at least have it under control, right? You can say when it is application consistent and when it is not. And then you can say how long you want to keep these long-term restore points for. So I create a restore point every 12 hours and I keep it for 3 days. So if I can still calculate, I'll have 6 long-term restore points, right? And in this example, it means I got in my short term, I got 1 hour. So I can go back 1 hour. And in that last hour, I can go back every 2 seconds because I have an RPO of 2 seconds. And then I'll go immediately to application consistent 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, etc. Right? So you see this when you do failover, right? And the failover options, they're actually all the same as in traditional replication. So you can fail over to the latest state, point in time, or long term, right? And then when you look at the screenshot, and I hope that you can read it properly. So in this screenshot, you can clearly see all of the different colors and what they mean. So I could say, I want to restore to the last restore point you've got, the last item you replicated, which means crash consistent. I don't like that. I would like application consistent. Well, possible, but then I need to look at what is the latest application consistent restore point. I could click on restore point at the bottom and there it will list you automatically all the application consistent restore points, right, of the long term. Actually, yeah, it can be crash consistent or app aware, but it will list you the long-term restore points and it will be written app aware or not, right? So you can look at this one and here you can see that in violet, it says application restore point, it's around 3:25 or something AM, for example, right? So that restore point I can pick. So it's up to you. Do you want to restore to just a couple of seconds ago? But maybe I'm not sure how the application will work, or I will go back to, I don't know, 15 minutes or 1 hour ago, but I'm pretty sure the application will work because it was application aware, right? Next, when you fail over, you also need to fail back. So if you fail over to the disaster recovery side, great, you get your business up and running again. But at some point in time, you want to go back in time, or better, you want to go back to the original site, right? To the original location. Could be that everything just was power outage or something. Now everything is back up. Great. It could be also you have meantime restored everything to another location, but you kind of seeding all of the previous restore points. You can use that one. Or it could be advanced option, meaning that you just decide that, well, everything has changed. I'm going to fail back to a completely different environment. Could be a different cluster, different hosts. Everything is changed. So we can do that, right? So you've got all of these options here. So actually all of the options for failover and failback, they look exactly the same as with the traditional replication jobs, right? So what are some of the main differences, right? There are a lot of differences. A lot of the things are also the same when it comes to functionality, but what are the main differentiators between just Veeam replication, like snapshot-based, or the CDP? So as we said earlier, the RPO is in hours, generally every 2 hours, 4 hours, snapshot, fine. CDP, RPO in seconds or minutes, all right? Then again, application impact. So with traditional replication, we have snapshots, which might or might not interrupt the virtual machine, right? At some customers, I've seen that users get kicked out of their application because snapshot is doing something. With other customers, they don't have this problem. So it's definitely something that can happen. CDP, no impact at all, because we just intercept all the I/O. VM has no clue what's happening. Then when it comes to application consistency, with Veeam replication, you can make that every 2 hours or 4 hours you're replicating, that every restore point is going to be application consistent every single time. With CDP, you can do this only for the long term, right? The short term is pure I/O, so is always crash consistent. The other options, plant failover, show replica, files, and item level restores, they're something that is not available today, but they are coming with the next update in 12.1, right? So then we will have some feature parity on those as well. All right, everybody still with me, right? Quite a lot already. Perfect. So, components. What components do we have? Let's have a look. So, if we just look at a simplified backup architecture, then what we see is, what do we need? We have a backup server where you have installed Veeam Backup and Application. We have a source and target hosts. They need to be in a cluster. So it doesn't work with just standalone ESXi hosts. It needs to be a cluster, right? And we have VMware CDP proxies, right? Which, you know, the Veeam proxies, just to back up regular virtual machines, but it has an additional role called CDP proxy, right? Because then you will specify on what port that they will connect, and you will have a cache that you can configure as well. But basically, setup looks very similar to traditional replication. The source proxy will read the data, send it to the other, and put the data there, right? Now, this could be a cluster to cluster within the same data center. For example, if you have a customer just from one rack to another rack, why not? It could be between sites. Customer has lots of bandwidth between the multiple sites that they have, so it could be from one location to another location. Could be also for you as a service provider, you're offering infrastructure as a service, you want to provide disaster recovery for those machines that you're running on the EAS platform. So you can do it from your own data center to another data center, right? So lots of options there. You can also run CDP to Cloud Connect or over Cloud Connect or via Cloud Connect, however you want to say it, right? I put a little star there because this is, again, right? First of all, it's only VMware. So, but the picture here, as you can see, only specifies VMware Cloud Director, but it also works if it's just vSphere, right? So customer side can be vSphere, service provider side can be just plain vSphere, but then we're using hardware plans. We're not using the organization VDCs and everything. And it can be like this, where on your end, service provider side is using VCD, right? VMware Cloud Director, right? But both options are available here, right? So, and then on the, if you're using VCD, right? It's quite confusing, VDC, VCD. If you want to use CDP, then you must install the IO filter for each VDC, right? Where the VApps reside. And after you install it, then we will automatically, or Veeam Backup will automatically install the filter driver on all of the underlying clusters and their hosts where this customer is on, right? So, yes, great. So, remember these names, right? We have coordinator service, IO filter, Veeam CDP proxy, source proxy, target proxy. Let's look a bit at these components. So first of all, we have got the coordinator. The coordinator is, let's say, the top level manager, right? It's the VBR server where this service is running, and this service makes sure that everything is working. It's the orchestrator in this setup, right? It creates the list of VM tasks to process. It checks that the required backup components or infrastructure components are available. It checks with the VMs and the hosts in vCenter. It checks vCenter to create empty replicas, register them. It makes sure that it asks vCenter to apply the Veeam CDP replication storage policy, right, to intercept all the IO operations. It also is the one who will say, okay, I want to set the network traffic rules. I want to choose which proxy, right? And it monitors also the entire infrastructure for changes, right? So this is important. So what this also means that you could say, single point of failure, because if this one goes down, nothing's going to happen anymore, because it kind of does everything. It's the brain of the operation. Kind of yes, but also kind of no. So if this goes offline, services crashes, VM or server is unavailable on the network, CDP still runs. So everything is still replicating. No problem there at all. But as soon as something happens with the underlying infrastructure, like proxy goes down, then no proxy will be assigned. It will just stop working. Or some vMotioning, right? Some things going on in the underlying infrastructure. Well, the coordinator service is not there to map out all the changes and to act on it. So then it will stop working, right? Then you will need to bring it up and fix it. But if it's just like temporarily a glitch and it's just offline for a couple of minutes, or you install some Windows update, no problem. Everything just keeps on going. So that's pretty cool, actually. So then we have source filter. Source filter, so that's what you install, right? So it runs on the ESXi host and it intercepts the IO request, right? So, and we get one filter instance per virtual disk. So if you were to look at the ESXi and you just check the processes that are running there, then you will see these filter instances that are running, right? So one filter instance per disk, simple. Now what is also important is TCP, right? So I didn't put it just there for fun, but we make sure that all of the data is guaranteed delivery, right? So we're using TCP because what's the point in having disaster recovery if we're just using UDP? Maybe it will arrive, maybe not, right? We need to make sure that when DR happens, everything is working, all the data is there. So everything is using CDP. Next, source daemon. Yeah, so we have a process that runs on the ESXi that communicates with the coordinator, with the VBRs, right? Veeam Backup and Replication, that's where the coordinator service is running. And we have one daemon per ESXi. And this one is the one that gets all of the information about, okay, which proxies do I need to send the data to? Which are the traffic routes that I need to take? And it connects to the proxies. Could be a virtual proxy, could be a physical proxy, right? So for example, some customers implement dedicated VM kernel interfaces just for this type of traffic. Well, then you can specify the preferred networks and you can let the daemon know that, hey, all of the traffic for the replication should be sent over this network, right? Then it goes to the correct proxy, virtual proxy, physical proxy. Okay, so we receive the data, filter driver receives all the data, goes to the daemon, and sends the data to the source proxy. So then we've got the source proxy. Source proxy will collect all of these changes. So it grabs all of the information it receives from the daemon and stores them into the RAM, right? So primarily, memory is used on the proxy. The disk is used as a cache. So the disk is actually there in case RAM is full. And we all know which one of both is the fastest, right? Obviously RAM. So if you use the cache, then you're going to have some latency and this and that. So ideally, when doing a proper sizing for CDP, make sure that you have enough RAM to compensate for all the throughput that you're going to send through, right? Just because everything will be stored in RAM and then passed on to the network to the other machine. Proxy is also the component that will take care of compression, encryption. So this is automatically, and as said before, it can be a virtual proxy, it can be a physical proxy, right? You can choose in the end. I mean, if you use virtual proxies, it also means it's going to impact your virtual infrastructure a bit because you're going to use resources right there. If you use physical proxies, then you can kind of take all that data transfer or all that traffic outside of your virtual infrastructure. And generally, those machines have more RAM than virtual machines. So performance is also probably a bit better, but you can choose. Then you have a target proxy. So target proxy gets the traffic from the source proxy, right? That was quite a surprise. This target proxy decrypts all the data, decompresses all the data, and sends it further on, right? Because it still has to go to the target ESXi and the data store. So again, the same, receives all the data, stores it in the RAM. If RAM is full, uses the disk cache. Ideally, RAM is never full, and we can just pass on all the traffic, right? Easy actually on this one. So then we have target, daemon, and filter. So again, on the ESXi, there is a daemon running there, right? And we also have the filter drivers installed on those in the target cluster. So on each of that host, we also have this filter driver, right, for the virtual machines. But in this case, filter driver is inactive because we don't need to capture any I/O there, right? The filter driver is only enabled when we're doing failover. And then actually we can start doing failover, failback, so that this filter driver becomes the active one and the other one is then passive, and we can start replicating from B to A, right, in a CDP scenario, right? So, for example, if you go to the ESXi host, you check the processes there for this virtual machine that you replicated, there's no processes there for this single machine, for example. All right, great. So next, the chain, the CDP replication chain, right? Not that complicated, might seem a bit complicated, but it's not. So first two you definitely know, right? So what does a virtual machine consist of? It consists of VMX and VMDK. Nothing really special there. Just that we have a bunch of VMDKs, right? So we have the base disk. So the initial VMDK that is created when we do the initial sync. So the first time replication, we need to send all of the data. That becomes then the base disk, base VMDK. And then we start creating some delta disks, right? As time moves on, we start collecting all of the changes into this transaction log, T-log files, kind of like looking at the database, right? You have all the change to a transaction log, and then it commits it to the disk. It's kind of the same thing here, right? And we'll go into that a little bit. And then we got some interim disk, right? That is only used like for protective purposes. So when we're doing failover. And we have also some metadata file like VMFD and meta, which are metadata files. You don't really have to think about what these kind of files do, right? But if you just go and have a look at the data store, this is what you will see, right? Very simple. So, and delta disks, they're all automatically created, right? So for example, when long-term restore points are created, you will see that some extra VMDKs are created. We have some technical points, right? So for example, we have some settings that when these transaction log files, well, they can reach a specific size. And if they reach a specific size, then we will create a technical point, right? To make sure that these files don't keep growing forever, right? So we keep them under a certain size and we move on so that we can still manage to commit and remove them afterwards, right? Good. So this is the chain, right, on the data store. So how does this look like on the in terms of retention? Yeah, so when we have a look at the retention, what we see is similar to a backup chain, right? You have like a full backup, you would say, which is in this case like a base disk, right? The full VMDK, the initial one, and then you have the delta disk. Delta disk is like the incremental backup file, kind of, right? That's how you could compare those two. So what you see here is that when in a short-term retention, right? So for example, I set this to 4 hours. I want to keep all the transactions that happened in the last 4 hours. I want to go back to every 30 seconds, for example. Okay, this is a chain. So first of all, Veeam Backup and Replication will look for outdated short-term restore points, right? So it will check, is there anything outdated? Now, if anything outdated exists, then it will commit the data from this transaction log file into the nearest technical point, right? And you see here TP0, TP1. So these are just the delta disks, right? So this is just the naming that we're using. So we will take this as in the second picture. We will commit the data from this TLog and we will move it into the nearest technical point. Now, if that transaction log does not contain any data anymore for further restore points, then why keep it? So we will remove it. Simple. And then we will check if this technical point is without a transaction log. That means it's also outdated. We don't need it anymore. So this data will then be merged, right? And the data of newer technical points or new delta disks, right? Or also long-term restore points, these are committed into the outdated technical point, right? So long-term restore points, they always will remain unchanged, right? Until they are retained by the retention, right? But with the short term, you will see that this can shift. So it's basically like a transaction, right? We commit the things to the disk and then we delete or get rid of the transaction log file and we merge that delta disk or the delta changes into the other disks. Simple, right? Nothing that you actually have to worry about. All of these things happen automatically. Yeah. Then when it comes to long-term retention, so again, Veeam Backup and Replication checks for outdated long-term restore points. If they exist, it will rebuild the file to include the data of the newer long-term restore points, right? So this could also look a little bit like when you have a forever forward incremental backup chain, right? Then the oldest incremental will be merged with the full backup, right? It's kind of very similar to this. So we take the restore point from Monday, we will inject it into the base disk. Now we have all that data committed. So actually the restore point or the disk from Sunday became Monday because it now contains also the data from Monday, and the chain moves on like this, right? So it moves forward in time. And then we delete the data from Monday because it's already existing in the base disk. And like this, it moves on, right? Cool. Next, CDP policy statuses. Because you set up the job. Now what happens when you actually run the job? So CDP policy statuses. Yeah, so initially they can have a few statuses. So the first one that you will see is initial sync. Initial sync means that all of the data is being copied from A to B. So we'll see a lot of data in red in the throughput screen because all of the data is being sent to the disaster recovery side. Once that is done, it will switch to syncing. And then it's just the incremental synchronization that is in process, right? So as you can see here on the screenshot, right, it just says syncing for those machines, capturing all of the I/O, etc. You can also see some other very interesting statistics in terms of SLA. Yeah, so if you meet the SLA or not, right? So for example, if you set 30 seconds, then 30 seconds is your SLA. So Here it's 99%, so it happens apparently that we don't manage to copy all the data within 30 seconds. And you will see this as a warning, right? Or could be an error if it's even longer. So next is also CBT mode. Replica data on the target host is not actual. What does that mean? Okay, we got this covered in the next few slides. And then success, warning, error. Actually, this is what you see when the job is disabled, right? Or the policy, right? It's not called CDP job, but it's CDP policy. When the job is disabled, you will see the actual status that it had. Okay, so what happens when everything runs normal? When everything runs normal, it works like this. VM has some changes. We have some block A, and now AB, and we have DB, and we have an RPO set of 10 seconds. So this doesn't mean that we are copying data every 10 seconds. No. This means that we've got 10 seconds to get the data from A to B. So everything needs to happen within these 10 seconds. So what we do is 50% of the time we're collecting and 50% of the time we're sending. So at 10 seconds, it means that we've got 5 seconds collected. And now, once collected, we have 5 seconds or 50% of the time to send all the changes, because then we are within SLA, within our 10 seconds, right? So this is the normal or ideal scenario when you have enough performance to send all of the IO and everything will be green. Right? Restore points, that will be the green zone, right? So where you have every time like 10 seconds, 20, 30, 40 that you can click on to restore to. Okay. Now it can also happen that bandwidth issue. You don't have enough performance. Proxy is not available anymore. Network disconnection, whatever, right? Because as mentioned before, we're using TCP. So we are using guaranteed delivery of all of the data. But there can be situations when you're just not able to send everything, right? So that would mean that you get some inconsistencies and could lead to the loss of restore points. So what happens is that we collect, and now, well, we don't have anything. So CDP has a special mechanism, right? Has some tools actually that return data into the consistent state. So the IO filter on the source host has a mechanism to track the data blocks that have been changed, change tracking, right? Just as you used to with the backup. And the IO filter deletes the data block addresses from the list of change blocks only after the confirmation message was successfully received from the target host, right? So it will just keep track of all of these blocks for as long as needed, right? And then suddenly everything is working again. So what we will do is we will read all these blocks, because now we have a map of all the blocks that have been changed. So we'll just take these blocks actually from the data store, send them to the target. So we've got everything back. And then we can switch again to clean mode, right? Let's say where everything is operational again, and we can start sending all the data again. Okay, so we've got that mechanism in place. What you will see, of course, is that when you do a restore, you'll see a little gap, right? Because you won't have the exact 10-second restore points available. All the data will be there, but you won't be able, in this period of downtime or problem time, you won't be able to pick a specific restore point. All right. And then what you will see is you will get RPO report. Simple. So for example, what you specify earlier, right? We've shown this before. In the option, you have the reporting, and you can say, okay, if it's exceeding my 10 seconds by 2 seconds, so 12 seconds, I want to receive a warning. If it's 13 seconds, I want to receive an error. So set this to something adequate to whatever it is that you want to see, because otherwise you'll be spammed, right? Let's be Let's be honest. So set this and then you'll receive notifications. And when everything goes back to successful, you'll also receive a notification that everything is back. So you'll immediately see when something changes, right? So disaster recovery offerings, right? So this is almost the end of the presentation. So we've covered quite a lot, right? So we've gone pretty deep into the CDP. So what are the offers in general that you can offer with replication or with CDP, right? Or in terms of disaster recovery. So we've got on the left, we've got the traditional, let's say the snapshot-based replication, right? Just classic Veeam replication, which is generally used with site-to-site, yeah. But of course, you can also use CDP for site-to-site, yeah. So let's say this traditional, it's more the use cases. Well, you just want to replicate from host A to host B, from cluster 1 to cluster 2, from data center 1 to data center 2, but all within the same environment. Yeah? So service provider could also do this between IaaS platform 1 to IaaS platform 2. In the past, we had no Cloud Connect, so this was the only option. And you would see that service providers would be doing this with site-to-site VPN tunnels, and you would run into overlapping networks and definitely a bunch of security holes. In those times, luckily, ransomware was not that active yet. So it would mean that if the customer got hacked, the service provider would also potentially get hacked, this kind of stuff, right? So luckily for those kind of scenarios, when remote customers are involved or remote environments, we've got Veeam Cloud Connect. Yeah, so there the use case is the customer wants disaster recovery, but they don't have the budget, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the infrastructure. But I, as a service provider, do, or I can white label it from someone else. So I can now offer disaster recovery through Cloud Connect and receive them into my infrastructure. Or some service providers also use this to onboard or to migrate customers. So when you have a customer and they're like, okay, we have 300-400 virtual machines, we don't want to be investing in our infrastructure anymore. You can use replication or CDP to replicate them to your environment. And then at some point, just switch over to the new environment on your end and decommission the customer environment, right? Lots of options. Both have awesome functionality. And I mean, it is kind of the same software, right? It is Veeam backup and replication in the backend. So the options are more or less the same, right? So just the only big difference here is that, let's say, on a regular site-to-site, you would have vSphere to vSphere, Hyper-V to Hyper-V, VCD to VCD, with or without CDP, right? In case of vSphere or VCD. And for Cloud Connect, it would be customer has vSphere, you can have vSphere. Your customer has vSphere, you can have VCD, right? Or customer has Hyper-V and you have Hyper-V. So the vSphere into VCD, that is the only difference here, the main difference here. So you can have a multi-tenant platform built, and you can receive all your customers into your organization VDCs with all separate infrastructure, separate networking, quotas, whatever it is you want, you can have it right there. Right. Another thing is that in the traditional site-to-site, you can also use VRO, so the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. So that can also leverage regular Veeam replication, CDP, can even leverage storage replication with certain vendors. And then you also have the documentation and the reporting, right, that it has right built in there. That is something that is missing today in Veeam Cloud Connect. So maybe that is something that is coming in the future. Let's hope so. But that could be something that is different here. On the other hand, if you're using Cloud Connect, for example, and you're using it for onboarding or disaster recovery, you have possibility to expand the same platform into other services as well. So you could use it for offsite backups. You could use it for M365 backups. You could use it for just being an MSP, get visibility into what is running at the customer, etc. So lots of options here. If all of this looks very confusing to you, no problem, but just reach out to your local Veeam pre-sales and just have a nice discussion about this and see what is actually the best fit for your customers or for your setup, right? Some additional resources before we wrap up this session. We have a good Pro Partner website that contains lots of documentation. So it could be, for example, here, the Disaster Recovery as a Service Partner Success Kit, where you can find out what do I need to do when I want to start with disaster recovery, right? Then we also have a best practices guide. So we have a best practices guide that discusses not only disaster recovery as a service, but it also covers the other scenario, offsite backup, M365, public cloud, MSP, but from a technical point of view, right? So you can see how what is in it for me, and then you can see how is the design looking and how I need to build it. All right. So then we also got some videos, because not everybody likes to read. So we've got some how-to videos. So there is a playlist with all of the use cases. Again, just how everything is installed and configured. And then last but not least, we also have a YouTube list for the recovery orchestrator, because that's kind of a very interesting piece of software for the documentation and reporting part. And there is an entire playlist on how this product works and what it can actually do for you. So without further ado, we are at the end of our presentation. So any questions? I don't think I need to say that. I think we see a whole bunch of questions right in there. So we've just got a couple of minutes left. So we've got like 2-3 minutes left on top of the hour. So let's see if we can get through a few of these questions. And otherwise, it's fine if you need to leave for your next meeting or lunch or anything else. Then we can have a look at all of these questions and check which ones need follow-up. Then we will reach out to you, right? So thank you very much for attending this webinar. Hope it was very useful for you. Hope you learned something. It is a lot of information. Again, everything is also in the user guide. So definitely have a look at that. You will get the presentation, you will get the recording. Thank you very much. So let's have a quick look. So as mentioned, yes, it's only for VMware, right? Because we use this IO filter driver, this API. That's only on VMware, so it's not on Hyper-V. So so how does this work with the public cloud? Well, with the public cloud, it's VMware to VMware, right? So for example, public cloud, if you would be running maybe VMware on the public cloud, that could be something because you have VMware to VMware, but then we'll have to check on whether the underlying permissions support actually the installation of the IO filter. So that's something that we would need to check, right? So someone asked, how many virtual disks in parallel can be processed? Good question. So many, right? So we have, there are some numbers in the user guide as well that specify how many jobs you can create. So currently the number there is on 100. But for example, and in terms of virtual disks, we've done some tests. I think the latest test with 12.1 was up to 6,000 something virtual disks in an environment, generating a couple of gigabytes per second, and it was no problem. So a lot of it will also depend on what underlying infrastructure that you have there, right? But there is no real limit. So we could say like a couple of thousand should be fine if the infrastructure supports. Do we have a sizing tool for CDP? Good question. Well, we got some calculators out there. So, but I would definitely reach out to your local Veeam pre-sales to discuss this, yeah, because it's better to look at your infrastructure and your setup to make some estimates there as well, or to calculate some items, right? All right, we still have a lot of outstanding questions. So, all right, so let's just wrap up here. Let's be fair to everybody. It's already 12 o'clock here in my time zone, so let everybody go to lunch or to the next meeting, and we will answer the questions and reach out to you. All right, so thank you very much, and have a nice day. See you on the next webinar. Bye-bye.